We've got a couple of apologies, Megan and Phil, for lateness. Claire, thank you for being here. And today we've got a number of really different things on our briefing agenda. And the first up is the accessibility report. So Claire, I'll hand to you. Thank you.
Morena koutou. Just in terms of the accessibility, we've had an accessibility working group working through things at council for about a year, and they've had a focus on playgrounds, community facilities and footpaths, and that's been a really wide scope of work, and they've been talking about how they need to continue doing that into the next year because they've really just started on some of those things. Something to note is that the footpaths in particular needs a bit more. They're going to put up for some more budget for that in the 2027-2037 LTP because of the kind of cost of doing that work. And yeah, that's all I wanted to mention. We were doing a retrospective reporting, but we're now doing a proactive approach using the working group to talk about what's coming up.
That's all you wanted to say? Are there any questions or thoughts that you have on this accessibility report?
Shane? Sorry. I was just having a bit of a think. Sorry. In terms of scope, accessibility is generally in relation to access to buildings and that type of thing. Is there any opportunity for wider scope in terms of accessibility to the infrastructure from the point, I guess the subject I'm talking about is whātaro and the ability for the children from primary school to safely make their way to the new facility once it's built. And I've wondered if that factored in it at all in terms of accessibility or not.
That's a great point and something that I can take back to that project team.
Hi, it's great to see this work's happening. Was there, in terms of training up our staff and the skill sets and the knowledge base of what we need to be doing going forward, is there a really clear guidance set out for staff for all future development so that we're not having to retrospectively make changes, but we're always making sure we're on the front foot with all these decisions?
Certainly the staff in the property and infrastructure team consider accessibility as part of their business as usual. There has been a lot of discussion and there has been a recent training that was really well attended for staff, and so there's certainly a lot of willingness to think about this when people are planning projects as part of their business as usual, but I'll feed that back to the group as well.
I'm just looking at point 3 there under accessibility enhancements, and it states here that council is working towards the goal of at least one accessible playground in each community. And I start to wonder, is it a little bit excessive? Like, should we look to have one accessible playground in maybe main towns? Because I just want some clarification on what do you mean by community? Are we talking about every little community, or are you talking about our main hubs of towns and within our wards? And then the footpath plan there, like, great to see that some of our towns don't even have any footpaths. Are you able to share the locations or map of where the proposed footpaths are? And maybe that could be something that for us, because I know there's a lot in Darfield, Kirwee, and it says Waddington, but I'm assuming that's Waddington Sheffield, because Waddington wouldn't even be long enough to have 350 metres in there. If that's something that could come to the Melbourne Community Board, potentially it'll be a point of interest for our community around that.
I'll definitely feed that back to that part of council. Yeah, for sure. We'll ask that to happen.
Was there anything on the playgrounds around?
I'd have to
community or just our main hubs?
I have to get some advice from Adele, who's the playground specialist that we have in CSF. I guess what she might suggest is that it's just also for older people and young people with, young families and people that might have sight and other impairments. So it's not necessarily, it's more about reducing the barriers for participation in those playgrounds. But definitely I'll ask her about that and we'll feedback about that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, kia ora, Claire, and thank you for letting me talk your ear off earlier, because I figured we've only got 15 minutes on this and we could probably do an entire hour on it, to be honest. I guess, so we noted about the websites, just when people are trying to prepare themselves and find out where things are, that's not really that easy at the moment. But the main thing for me is probably still the engineering code of practice, and looking around at anybody who might be involved in that. Nope. It would be good to have that updated, and I know that we talked about the cost of retrospective, but the sooner we can get that sorted in the code of practice, the sooner the new developments, of which there are many, can be built in a way that we don't have to go back and do it again. We don't want to do it twice, and we know how to. It's just that we haven't actually updated the rules that then we can hold our new developers to get it right the first time. So there's not a question in there. It's just kind of summarising a very quick question and answer session that we had just now. Thanks.
Sophie, just because you've had the conversation, so was there any discussion about when that's going to happen or how that change might come about? Oh, sorry.
I have been trying to see if I can get it into the HUD conversations, but the people responsible for that area of work have been mostly working on local audit as well. So trying to get it, but previous to that legislation, I feel like there wasn't much reason.
Oh, you've turned yours off. Oh, you've got.
We couldn't have done it in the last 2 years because. The district plan was adopted some time ago now, and we're still waiting to see when the code of practice will be updated to match the new rules. And that came about, yes, there's been this ongoing program of reform, but personally I think we should have done this part already.
I'll follow on with that part of the conversation. I thought we had, Sophie, to be honest. My passionate friend beside me here about footpaths. There was quite a lot of debate, and largely it was based around developers saying it was too expensive. And we've been firmly of the view that growth should pay for growth, not us come and retrospectively fit stuff. And I was quite surprised to see in the document that the 1.8 on both sides of the street only applied to main streets, where I was quite certain in my mind that we'd voted for blanket 1.8 both sides of the road. So I guess there's some confusion as to what we voted for, obviously, in the engineering code of practice. Second point, the question I'm asking is particularly the new footpaths that you propose to do here in Waddington and a place like that, they will be at the spec of 1.8. So we're not going up and putting 1.5s in ourselves.
I'd have to get the technical information from the department. It's a little outside of scope for community services and facilities, and the property infrastructure people that report into that group, I'd have to go back and check that with them.
Because one of the other issues that we've got is that as part of our footpath renewal program, we renew footpaths that are crap and refresh them as crap. And if you, particularly in Lincoln, there's power poles in the middle of footpaths. And we put down new footpath, we took it up and put new footpath down exactly the same thing. And you go, why would you do that? And so I guess the question for us as a council is part of our footpath renewal program, are we widening, maybe we do less linear metres directionally, but we extend the width as we do renewals. And it's, certainly we'll have less renewals done, but they'll be at a standard which is accessibility compliant. So I guess I'd be providing that idea.
Thank you. Chair?
Oh, sorry. One last question.
Oh, no, the microphone went off as well.
Selwyn, Waddington Centre, I was surprised to see there's $90,000 budget there. My recollection of Selwyn at Waddington Centre is we were very, very deliberate in the design and construction of surprised to see there's $90,000 being found to spend there. That seems astounding to me that we would have anything to spend there because we were so deliberate in making sure it was accessible. Is that something, it sounds like a lot of money to spend there.
I'm not sure if Denise, you're able to comment on that.
I can't speak to that with any confidence other than the fact that it may have been budgeted in terms of out years. I am mindful that while community services and facilities groups facilitates a lot of the conversations, the contributing parts are other parts of the organisation. And so it's what we're presenting to you is information that's been obtained from other parts of the organisation, but it might be that the topics that are raised, particularly around the aquatic centre, but also the footpath, is deserving of a report in and of itself to a future briefing or similar.
What we're really keen is to ensure that the message gets passed down to be considered, and I wouldn't want to see, while I want to see accessibility, I don't want to see gold plating of a facility which is already good.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Look, I think that the conversation today leads to that we probably need to have a joined-up briefing. You can see there's nobody here from infrastructure today, and with community services, so we'll look to put that into the briefing, I would say, before June.
Thank you, Grant, for mentioning about the power poles in the middle of our footpaths for many of our towns. And those footpaths aren't going to be upgraded because they're not on a register for undergrounding. So the reality is towns like Springston and Leaston and other towns where it's traditionally been to actually put footpaths around power poles, that's not going to happen any time in the future. The reality is we just don't have the budget for undergrounding. So I just want to highlight that. What actually took my attention was when we were looking at 5 recent accessibility considerations in new facilities and facility upgrades. Then I get down to Springston. 3.5. And then I get down to Springston Community Hall. And we've got a maintenance of slippery paths and moss clearing. Well, that actually astounded me because, dared I say, when we had a hall committee, that sort of maintenance work was managed by the hall committee and a working bee. We don't have that anymore. We have CORD. CORD have a responsibility to taking up all those maintenance issues that community hall committees, when they were disbanded, we were assured that they were going to be uptaken, kept to the same standards by our council CCO. And I was actually astounded just to read a simple comment like that. So I would like some understanding. I know CORD's a CCO. I know CORD, to communicate with CORD, they come in quarterly. We can do a letter of expectation to them. But how do we communicate to CORD in the interim of them being an independent CCO that their maintenance work needs to be really considered, maybe at the governance level, then passed down to the CEO.
Deb, I think they'll be wrapped up in the briefing that Sharon just said we'll have much more time for. Nicole?
Good, thank you. And it's great to hear the conversations that have already been had, particularly obviously there's a few things that I've been banging my drum on for some time on this regard. And one of those was, so I'd brought up before, and it was when it was still the Planning and Climate Change Committee, is about having these accessibility audits and being able to get round. And since then we've had, and unfortunately I can't remember her name, who came and spoke to us about how hard it is for her to get round Rolleston, which backs up what I have said. So just in the meantime, so we've, is there a program that is in there now where people are looking at our staff. So we've got a working group about the footpaths and the network. So the working group, is it just staff, or is it involve people from outside? I'm just wondering about, some of it almost needs eyes on the ground to be able to feed through on certain things, if you understand what I mean.
Sharon?
Yeah, again, I'd say we need to wrap that up into the whole conversation and briefing that needs to come back around footpaths, commitments made against district plans, maintenance, etc.
Yeah, because my understanding, the footpaths on both sides of the road is a district plan thing. I was on that chapter, and I'm not aware of any submissions that were against that. So I would have thought that was operative now. But I would like that followed up to find out where that situation is. Thank you.
Question.
Claire, thank you for presenting. You've obviously itched something that we care about deeply, and Sharon, thank you for acknowledging there'll be some further work done on this, and there were other questions as well in the room that we didn't have time for today, so we'll come back to those councillors when we have the follow-up report. Thank you. The next item is policy review and development projects, and invite Jodie and Julie.
Thank you. Just to run through really quickly a couple of talking points from the paper, just to summarise that, and then I'll take you into the demo site for the policy repository and policy management tool. So really quickly, the framework essentially codifies, or the meta policy essentially codifies what we're already doing well, and that's just simply complemented by best practice policy management and best practice policy management systems that have been seen both in the sector and outside of the sector. So what does a framework and management tool essentially do for us? Well, it helps us govern how we develop and identify the need for new policies, and it also helps us manage them to avoid mass amounts of documents becoming out of date and repetitive documents. It also is going to help us assist with our decision making on when a policy document is needed, so identification, and also when it needs to be potentially retired and updated. It's also going to make policies a lot easier to find, and I know that that's a challenge for a lot of the staff at the moment around finding current up-to-date policies. It's going to clearly assign policy management responsibilities. It's going to help us improve compliance with our legal and regulatory obligations. It's also going to help us with audit results and receive favourable audit results. It's also going to help us with our review, with reporting on how we're going with policy management, and also provide clear and consistent decision making as well throughout council by the fact that things are going to be able to be found easily. So where we're at currently is we didn't have any explicitly dedicated staff to policy management. It was relatively ad hoc, and it was generally undertaken in addition to existing roles. So existing staff would generally be assigned to do policy on a sort of a relatively ad hoc basis. So we've also got varying levels of policy drafting and management expertise and experience within the organisation. And we didn't have any documented clear processes around policy management or development. We're also operating a relatively high trust model and also relying on the goodwill of staff to prioritise policy work and review, as well as their existing day-to-day responsibilities. And we also had no single place or no single comprehensive place to store and manage our policy documents. So what we're proposing now is we're going to have dedicated staff and subject matter experts with expertise on the policy topic. We're going to have a clear systematic delegation of authority around policy management and responsibilities. We're going to develop clear drafting support guides and process documents that will be administered centrally for consistency. And this will help us be a bit more adaptive to change and keep up with changes that are happening externally as well. We'll be able to identify what parts of our organisation are more affected by those and update our operational policy documents accordingly. And we're also going to have a digital management tool for our policy, so we have a clear single source of truth for our policies via our policy directory or repository, which will make things easier for us to find information as well. So the roles and responsibilities will be assigned basically on a tier basis, so clear responsibilities for councillors, ELT responsibilities and staff responsibilities. So I'll take you now through the policy directory. So this is available via the Te Pātaka and Port. So when staff navigate to this page via Port, they'll be met with this particular. I'll just minimise that. Is that easier for people to see? No, bigger. Cool. So there'll be a landing page here. So staff will be able to type in, say, they want to know about AI. Policy will turn up with AI and they'll be able to navigate to that. So there'll be keyword search functionality as well as grouping functionality. So staff will be able to search either by keyword or they'll be able to search via function group. So community facilities, governance, so on and so forth. There'll also be information on the landing page for staff, which will identify documents that have recently been published, so within the last 3 months or so. So that's easy. For them, that's easy to draw attention to them, as well as the ability for us to post news, which could be about a particular policy, which could be about a particular resource that we've provided to staff to help them on their policy review and development journeys. So there will be a lot of information for staff and resources for staff on this page to help them with their policy management responsibilities. In addition to that, we've also created dashboards. And these dashboards are based on our current groups. So if we were to use, say, for example, the People and Culture dashboard, each individual ELT member will be able to go into this and they'll be able to see all the policies that are in their suite that they are responsible for. They'll be able to link to the policies from here via the links below. They'll also be able to see the review status once we have input that into the system. So they'll be able to see whether it's current, work in progress, or overdue. In addition to that, there'll also be a section down the bottom here that will immediately draw their attention to any policies that are in fact overdue. So the policies that need attention will show all the policies that are either overdue for review or coming up for review. At the back end of the system, which will be administered by myself, we will be able to manage the back end of the system. So all the back end will basically have a folder for each individual policy that's either in development, retired or current. We'll be able to have all versions of that document saved. We'll be able to archive retired documents. We'll also be able to track the review status in the back end as well. So for reporting purposes, we'll be able to provide current, accurate and very up-to-date real-time policy management information. So if we were to go into a document, there'll will also be workflows as well. So from here, we'll be able to automate workflows. So if once a document is ready for review by an approval authority, then there'll be an automatic workflow with a link to that document that goes to that individual ELT member to help them review that document. So workflows will help us as well along the way to manage our policy documentation. And that's all I have to show you.
Thanks, Jodie. Well done. What a massive step up from where we've been. It's really cool to see the progress that's been made there. Comments or questions from councillors? Nicole?
So we can ask any questions on anything through it. This is great to see. My first job was writing policies and procedures. So for your meta policy, you've got under the key statements, principles, basis for document review and development framework. So under bullet point 3 is a new strategic direction of council or local government sector. So would that count as being, we've had a district plan review and some of what our restrictions were around maybe something like signage have changed, and would that be something that could possibly trigger having another procedure or something on our own land as opposed to looking at it from the district?
Yes, potentially. If there are any decisions made by the councillors, by council, or by ELT at the operational level, that may trigger a review of the associated policy documents and procedures if there are any changes or introductions.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. I was actually curious about in the port, because I tried to follow where you were going and we can't access that part. Is there anything in there that we need to be able to access, seeing as one of the layers of looking after policies is council?
We're working on that with IT at the moment. At the moment, the plan is to make sure that the policies that council need to approve are go into diligent, and I'm doing some testing with IT around how do we make sure getting those actual policy documents into diligent. We're also playing around with how we can provide links to those policies that need to be approved by council, so you can see review dates and progress potentially of those as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm interested in the delineation around policy management between governance and management and who decides what, I guess. Before you answer it, I suppose I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, we had a thing called the tree shading policy, and one of the executive team here decided that that was in their purview to change or actually 86 that policy. And the policy was in place because the good previous councillors had recognised that the winter, with trees growing up in a rural context, some roads were in the shade all winter and never got ice off them. And so it was beneficial to have, but the person who reviewed the policy was a staff member who was taking an urban context and couldn't see why tree shading was a problem. So that policy just got 86'd and no one ever knew it had gone until someone said, where's the tree shading policy gone? So that's an example, but the question is where's the delineation and who decides what, and particularly I think what's concerned me is making sure that track changes are on all policies, that there is a review, because sometimes you don't know what's been taken out because there wasn't any track changes. So a two-part question, thank you.
So I'll grab that one. So probably what we're looking at there comes down to the other project that Jodie's working on, which is the non-financial delegations review, where we kind of look at, we start and we go, what needs to be retained with council, what is the process, and what is delegated down to the CE. So that will come back to this group as part of that review, rather than being something that sits under the meta policy itself.
I think that's the comment I would make. It's extremely important that that process is very crystal clear, and probably to err on the side of caution that if you're in doubt, you put it to the council to delegate down rather than saying we've already delegated it, because we get a bit toey about that as governors.
Yeah, thanks. So in the CEO's KPIs, there's a multi-year project that talks about financial delegations, non-financial delegations and policy. So we've already had the financial delegations brought back to council, which you've endorsed. This is stage 2, which is the policy. And then the remaining stage over the next financial year through to June 2026 will be the non-financial delegations, and we'll follow the same process we've done with all of the others, is that it comes back to briefings, workshops, and it comes back to councillors for the final decision, so that as governors you have the final sign-off. But again, we'll take you through the relevant workshops so we get your input early.
Just to finish the implications of that example.
Sorry.
So they're getting rid of the tree shading policy with the advent of centre pivot irrigation. Internal shelter belts on most farms have now been gone, and everyone puts their shelter belts on the peripheral of their farm next to the road. And so long term, Selwyn is going to have a tree shading issue, an icy roads issue coming up, and there's no policy in place.
Look, what I'd like to do is thank Steve and his team, and for all the work that you've done in this area. I know that, and the other councillors really appreciate where we've got with regards to this. I guess following on from Grant's question, there was a policy in the policy manual that required within 6 months of a newly elected council to workshop all the policies and delegations within the policy manual to understand how it worked. It was an opportunity for them, just like Grant's said, about input from the rural community. And, you know, it was an input for new councillors to come along with their ideas of what they'd heard in the community, and did we need a policy or didn't we need a policy. It was a process that was in place. And it worked very well. And it actually got ownership from the councillors sitting round. And I understand, you know, that unfortunately that's been lost. Unfortunately, the policy, once again, is not in the policy manual. It's just fallen out. And to require just new councillors to be educated or informed about the policy manual early on in the process, it's the responsibility of all councillors. They need to have ownership, and if they come to council, it's the perfect opportunity for them to say, I have a problem in my community, this is what I'd like to have addressed, how do I do it? And then the staff listen and think that might be a good idea to develop a policy around that idea. And you're always going to have that opportunity in the 3-term triennial where people in the community, who are our eyes and ears, they're listening to their ratepayers. They will bring those issues to you. And the issue is, how do we get a discussion going that actually says, well, do we need a policy around this? And if the answer is yes, then we can ask staff to develop the policy. That's a good governance model. And it's clear delineation between the governance and staff. And I appreciate that this is still work in progress with regards to understanding how that model is extended through the governance. But I would like to see for the next triennium that we do have a policy in place that actually educates all the councillors, as I say, and takes all the information and then works through it through the policy manual. And that may need to be updated because that's the governance role of how do you introduce policy. I appreciate that there will always be internal policy, Sharon, under you with regards to staff. But this is how do councillors actually bring their issues to the table that may require a policy to be developed. So I would strongly urge that we do actually have a clear process in place for any new councillor or existing councillors or those elected have the opportunity to sit down and actually bring their concerns to the table so we can so the council can hear them and say, well, I didn't realise that was happening in a rural community. Perhaps we send the staff away to actually make a policy or see the feasibility of a policy through you, Sharon, because we only can employ you and, you know, it has to be one under your delegation. So I'm just saying that I have sadly missed that policy and, you know, and that's what I'd like to say. But thank you very, very much, team, for all the improvements that you've done. I really appreciate it.
Sharon.
I just wanted to say thanks for your acknowledgement, Deborah. The team have done an absolutely stunning job. And again, of creating that framework which provides visibility and will provide visibility for councillors and make sure that the governance policies, but again, the framework through the workshopping where councillors will have their input as to what they see as important for them as governors. We are committed to that through the process we've established. And part of post-October, once we have our elected members, part of the orientation will be around making sure that councillors know where the policies are, what's accessible, etc. What we are doing is building some frameworks that take us into the future, that are sustainable, that aren't reliant on individuals and won't get lost.
Steve?
Yeah, thanks. Look, echo the efforts of the team. It's been quite a big job. One of the things that's touched on in this report, and I think to some degree it responds to Councillor Grant's questions around awareness and transparency, is that now we've got this system in place that's driven through the technology rather than a Word document basis. We're going to be able to report back through the Audit and Risk Committee of the policies that are coming up for review, that are out of date, and we're going to bring that entire table through, and because this is now part of Julie's work plan, so this now becomes just part of how we do things around here. It's that transparency. You will then see the suite of policies that are there, and then the councillors now and the councillors in the next triennium can then debate, is there anything missing? So that will be part of that check and balance with the community. Julie, can you touch on the community access side of this so that the community can also see the policies that we have?
I'll take that one, Steve. So the policy repository is largely for staff and Te Pātaka, but from that, the policies that are identified as relevant to the public, whether it be because of the high significance, whether it be because it's part of the LTP, whether it's because of policy that we need to consult on, generally anyway, that's sort of quite, those policies of that ilk, they'll be made public on the public website, which is exactly what we're doing now. So policies will be able to be taken from that with confidence that it's the current policy and put onto the web for staff to, for the public to be able to access all those policies relevant to decision making.
Elizabeth.
2 questions. The first question is obviously, is it a little bit like the code, the codes that we had? Have we got 28,000 policies that you're now amalgamating? I'd be interested to know what that figure is, roughly. And the second question is, what Grant raised was a policy that's been written with an urban mindset, but obviously sometimes we need flexibilities within policies. Is that a case because obviously what might work in an urban area might be different to what's required in a rural area, for example, within the same policy? Are we able to acknowledge or Have you guys highlighting as you go through outdated policies or policies that might need to be readjusted so that they have a wider scope to them or they're fitting the updated criteria? And if so, how is that part of what you're doing at the moment?
Thanks for the question. I don't have the exact stats with me, but I can get those. But at last count, I think we had identified roughly around 17 policies that could be merged with existing policies. And I think we had around
mid-hundreds.
Yeah, in terms of total policies that we have, we've got some hundreds that we're trying to rationalise and merge where possible, and potentially retire as well. So that is part of the process that we go through in terms of policy management practice that we are going through currently, and we will continue to do so as part of just an ongoing plan of work whenever we are reviewing a particular document that is existing, or if we think we need one.
In terms of the second question around policy development, what we've now actually got, because we've got Jodie as a dedicated resource and we're identifying the policies as they come up for review, we do have someone who's helping people guide how do we write good policy, what are the objectives of this policy, someone actually going through and once there's been a first draft, putting positive challenges back and looking at those before they get to the approval stages. Ultimately, the owners of the policies are the individual sponsors within the business units. So how they develop those policies works on those objectives, but there are the checks and the balances through the approval process and the support, so that it's not simply one person developing policy alone without any kind of support and questioning, I guess. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. There's been some just good conversation from the council. I was wondering about the development of new policy. Just because we get a good idea, I don't think means we want to develop a policy for it. And just because we're going to do something once or twice, also, I don't think we need to start developing policy for those things. Can you just talk about what the trigger looks like for policy development? Is it about how repetitive the process is? Is it about the breadth of staff that will need to be involved in the delivery of whatever the policy is asking to be done? How would we decide? Well, how does the organisation decide when it's just something that's part of someone's job, and then when it actually requires some further level of certainty around how that will be delivered?
Sure, thanks for the question on that. So the criteria that we look at around includes some of the things that you've already outlined. It's about scope, so who does this actually impact? Is this really something that only is talking about how we do something that's relevant for a team? And if that's the case, then it might just be simply appropriate to have like a procedure and ProMat for that rather than like a policy on it, if it's a how-to. If it's wider than just a particular team, if it affects the organisation, then potentially a policy might be appropriate at that stage. But we will assess what's the risk involved in this, what's the level of clarification, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and once we have those questions, we can probably assess what type of document and how wide it applies. Yeah.
I think there's also a control in place as well, right, Jodie, where once a policy is developed, it's not an individual team develop a policy and it's there and it's done. So there is an approval step process. So there is the ability for ELT and CE to challenge, does this actually need to be a new policy? Or it's not, individual teams are not going to be able to put organisational-wide policies in place on their own.
Great, thank you both for... Oh, sorry, Shane.
Just one, tēnā rā tātou. And within the search engine, will it recognise keywords if I come up with a great idea for a policy and it already exists? Or the community wants to find that, they'll just type in a keyword and it'll take us or me to that particular policy that it sits within?
Yeah, for the internal Te Pātaka policy repository, we can put the metadata, so keywords in as part of that metadata. So if it's related to a long-term plan or annual plan, if you search for that, then you'll get the policies that potentially are relevant to that, or if it's a keyword like artificial, it'll come up artificial intelligence. For the public-facing website for policies, we need to work with IT to discover what's the best way to help people with that as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you both for the presentation. That's been helpful. Thank you. Next we have Robert Love, Government's Going for Growth Policies. Morena Bob, thanks for being here.
Morning all. So just an update on the Going for Growth central government program. So overall the purpose of the program is to increase housing capacity and affordability. It's in 3 pillars. So the first pillar we've already spoken about, which is largely around freeing up land and removing planning barriers. So that's things like RM reform, 30-year growth targets, intensification, and relooking at the medium density residential standards where targets have been met. The big pillar that has been released since we've had a discussion about this is around improving infrastructure funding. So that's replacement of DCs with development levies, which would capture the long-term cost of infrastructure. They haven't actually specified what that long-term would be, but I'd imagine be somewhere around a 30-year term. Levies would be for each area. So each urban area and each service area. So there'll be one for water, one for reserves, one for transport for each urban area. We can have specific high levy charges for additional high cost infrastructure areas. So that may have high natural hazards or stormwater or some sort of extra thing in that particular space. Targeted rates can be used where new infrastructure would benefit existing residents as well. But there could be some issues around how we currently use DCs on a sort of a ward area type basis to help pay for the whole stuff within that area or ward. This would be very specific to that particular urban area. So you may see the smaller townships not be able to generate enough income in that levy space to be able to pay for the required infrastructure. The third pillar is around providing incentives to councils for supporting the growth, but we don't actually have any details on that to date. In saying all that, no details have actually been introduced into Parliament on any of this yet, so the bill is going to be introduced in September 2025, passing into law expected in the middle of 2026. The levies would be expected to be introduced from 1 July 27 with a mandatory requirement by 1 July 2030. So that's all we have at the moment on that, and as we get more detail as those bills are introduced, we'll provide a lot more detailed briefing. Any questions?
Elizabeth.
Hi, Robert. How do you envision it's going to work where we've got a Wesco and with the levy? So the money being ring fenced for the Wesco versus the money that's set aside for council for other avenues?
So my understanding is the DCs are currently being levied for that will be transferred over to the Wesco, and the Wesco can also levy. Well, it can levy levies under the new system as well. So they'll be able to put out their own requirements for development, so to fund their own infrastructure.
Thank you for the report. Just with regards to looking at Pillar 1, freeing up land for urban development, including removing unnecessary planning barriers, how are we going to actually manage growth within the current infrastructure? Growth actually puts an impact on infrastructure. For example, we can collect currently a development contribution for roading, and quite often the argument has been that a limited amount of DCs is actually collected because there is an argument put forth that, well, we'll put in the roading, but the other public members are going to use it, so they're required to put in a targeted rate with the level of service. The issue that I have with regards to that methodology or that thought is that more people, growth actually puts pressure on our operating expenditure. You've got more people using the existing roading that's already been paid for both by developers and the community, and further growth puts in that. How will that be covered by the development levies to even it out? Because at the moment it just seems a little bit unfair. That's one question. I guess the other is, do you know any information about how the development levies are able to be appealed for the appeal process?
So it's touching on that first question. So we currently have a 30-year infrastructure strategy which is developed at long-term plan time. So that document will be absolutely critical for this. So the development levy will go rather than development contribution, which is generally up to that 10-year. This will actually look at the full cost of that infrastructure development over that long-term period and fairly proportionate out to all the potential growth that will happen within that space. As I mentioned, if new infrastructure benefits existing residents, there is ability to target rate those existing residents to help cover that shared benefit of that. And on the last one, there will be a prescribed methodology that will come out in the bill for actually how you calculate your development levies, and I assume that would have some sort of appeal process fixed to that, but I haven't actually released the detail yet.
My question is actually around the MDRS, and are we actually going to look to review any of the location in that around our intensification areas, or are we just going to keep that quite broad into the urban areas?
So once the bill has been introduced and ratified and gone through Parliament, we'll be bringing that issue back to the Council for a decision. And we'll also do multiple briefings and workshops to lead up to that decision-making point. Yeah.
And I guess from our smaller communities that we have many of, I guess I have a few concerns, and I understand that you don't have the information in front of you, so I guess it's just a note for when we, I guess we'll make a submission on the bill in due course, and that I have some major concerns around those levies only being able to be spent in the urban environments, and that our smaller communities are actually going to suffer from this bill. So I look forward to that work coming back here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. I can see when we get to the point of actually submitting on an actual bill that we're going to have plenty to say. I mean, there is some stuff in here to love, like mixed-use developments. Always a fan of actually having, shops on the ground and people living above, make better use of the space, that sort of thing. But there are some worrying bits, even just like the small bits, like you can't require balconies. I don't know if anybody else has ever lived in an apartment, but with an apartment without a balcony is... It's grim. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I guess the main bit that I don't think you'll be able to answer this because, again, the bill's not there yet, but the whole part about being prohibited from imposing rural-urban boundary lines. I mean, we used to have that, then they were obliterated, and we've seen what happened with sprawl since then. Combine that with the way they've been saying about if certain land uses are restricted for regulatory reasons, then councils potentially are going to have to compensate landowners for the fact that they can't build houses there or they can't do a certain thing, even if it's because it's a protected wetland. I don't know. Have you heard anything about how flexible that might be to understand that sometimes there's a really good reason for prohibiting a certain kind of use on certain land?
Not in relation to how this is going to work, but this does go hand in hand with RM reform and National Planning Standard policy statement on urban development, which does have some restrictions in there, and as with the highly productive land policy statement as well. But the actual, if you have a wetland or some sort of restriction on your land and potential compensation or potential offsetting of that, to be confirmed. Yeah.
Is there a chance, Robert, that we'll come back to full council for a workshop before we do a submission on the bill? Because I find it quite hard to go through either the retrospectively or 2 days before we submit a bill and we just get it in an email. Because I find coming here we get a much fuller picture if we all get to ask questions and go through the detail. I think this is a really significant one to our council, so I'd just like to put that forward. The second thing is there any indication, or could you potentially see the value in when we do set, with the levies are set, obviously, DCs, etc., whatever that plays out to be staged or staggered, or who potentially get to choose when those are set? Obviously, I'm just wondering how much you feel the bill will change the way that process works now, and what will be the best outcome working with developers so that we're an enabling council.
Just that second question first. So the bill, and as indicated by government, is that they'll have a prescribed methodology for calculating levies within the bill itself. So we won't have that ability to have that flexibility.
You're talking about the cost there, the cost of the levy. I was talking about the timing of
Potentially
stating.
that could be part of the methodology as well. Just don't have that level of detail to provide a comment on. On your first question around submissions, we always best endeavour to bring it to this council in person as a workshop before we make any submission, but sometimes submission timeframes are extremely tight. They sometimes 2 weeks at a minimum, maximum sometimes, so it doesn't allow us to bring it back to this forum, unfortunately, but we will try if we can.
Thank you. Robert, can you just talk a little bit about the IFF Act? And that's not something that our council has looked at using or is necessarily needed to use. I think Tauranga is really the only space that has been picked up by our council, and there's changes here to kind of make that easier. Some of that is, in the memo says it's about for the developer to be able to access funding. But do you see a change for us as a council in that? And maybe Alison, I don't know if you've got any views on how we access like those other ways of funding infrastructure.
Probably a question for Alison more than myself, sorry.
Thanks, Sam. I mean, we can certainly reach out to Tauranga to look at how they are funding things. We've got contacts through various CFO groups and whatnot, and that has been questions that we've asked in the past around development contributions when that does move to levies. And I think the broader part here is, as Bob's alluded to, we will, once we've got more detail, start looking at scenarios around how this will impact certainly future annual plans, long-term plans, but I can reach out to Tauranga directly and get some more specific examples of what they're doing in that area.
And I've been a part of a small working group with Mahi from Tauranga, Glenn from Queenstown, the mayors of those two spaces, and with Hamilton, Mayor Paula as well, to look at how high growth areas are affected by the legislation that government brings in. So we've had one catch up, and I've shared the data with that group that I've shared at the last two council meetings around the true cost of growth for communities where the government doesn't step up and fund the facilities that go around the growth. But I think that group will also have some views there. So I'll link in some of this work that we do to make sure that the things that we could learn from, or the things that we can also say and enhance with Queenstown and the likes of those other places that are growing really quickly at our submission phase, that there can be some alignment, so we don't have the 4 or 5 fastest growing places in the country all saying very different things in that submission space. And to me, the missing pillar is the most important pillar, which is the funding that's going to come with the growth, because if growth is going to pay for growth, then at the moment that's certainly not happening. And we heard last week, a new set of lights is only going to be funded 15% by development contributions, and the rest of it is funded by the existing community. And so until we get another tool, and that if that's the GST on new builds coming back, then that would be a big help to councils like us. There might be some other tools as well that the government is considering, but at the moment the minister's stayed pretty quiet on what the funding is going to look like, other than saying it will come. At the last all of local government meeting a couple of months ago, Minister Bishop came and spoke, and Simon Court spoke as well on some of the stuff, and said that the incentives is Pillar 3, and Pillar 3 will happen, but without that level of detail to know how it's going to be funded, it still leaves us. Well, it still leaves me feeling like we're in a space where the existing community is left picking up the bits that either the government's not funding around community safety, housing, schools, education, health, or the developer's not funding, or the growth community's not funding around the infrastructure for wastewater pumps, or for intersection lights upgrades and those sorts of things that our community benefits from, sure, but we wouldn't be doing that work if it wasn't for the growth community moving into a place. So really looking forward to the incentives changing for us, for the incentives for communities to grow around Pillar 3 and the funding changing. Bob, did you have anything else you wanted to finish with? Great, thank you. Yeah, we'll adjourn the meeting. We've got a guest coming. Sharon Davies from Lincoln University is joining us at 10:30, so we'll adjourn till then. welcome here, and George, glad you're able to make it, and saved by whoever drove to get you. That's excellent. Thank you for being here this morning, and really looking forward to your presentation, and thanks for the work that was pre-circulated as well. I'll hand the floor to you. The microphone, just press the button on the right hand side, we'll turn it on, and thank you.
Ata Maria, good morning. I'm just going to give a real quick intro to our guest, Dr. Shannon Davis. Shannon's a senior lecturer at the School of Landscape Architecture at the university, at Lincoln University, and the research leader within the Centre of Excellence for Future Productive Landscapes. Shannon specialises in looking at our peri-urban areas, urban agriculture and food landscapes. Interestingly, I found out last night that Shannon's favourite Pokemon is a Jigglypuff, which is an excellent choice, so I think we could trust what she says here today. Shannon led the... Sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you. Shannon led the Peri-Urban Potential Project, which was funded by our Land and Water National Science Challenge. I know a few of you participated in some of those workshops. This research investigated innovative land use possibilities for landscapes that surround urban areas and how they can benefit both people and production through innovative spatial design. Now, I won't get too much into that because Shannon's going to share the findings from that research and some other mahi she's been doing and with her team around peri-urban areas, but it's very relevant to Waikirikiri Selwyn, particularly as the case study approach included the towns of Rolleston, Lincoln and Darfield. And it's also really important and related to our mahi with the area plans, which is the first kind of piece to implement and breathe life into Waikirikiri Kitua Future Selwyn. So I won't say any more, and I'll let Shannon run you through what she's got to talk to us about today.
Kia ora koutou, and thanks George for the introduction. The Jigglypuff is known for being a bit of a rascal, so hopefully that's all right. So I'm a senior lecturer in landscape planning at Te Whare Wānaka o Aoraki, Lincoln University, and I've actually had the pleasure of meeting quite a number of you off and on over the last few years. So it's wonderful to come back today and be able to give you an update and talk about a bit more about the research that is coming out of our research centre and the School of Landscape Architecture. So I suppose my interest in this area spans back a number of years when it really just hit me around why we're designing cities and settlements that aren't considering where our food is coming from. You know, food is a fundamental of life, and to have a sustainable and resilient settlement, surely food must be a key consideration in our planning. And more concerning is our current planning approach, which is pushing food production further and further and further away. So it's not integrating with urban development, and it's being pushed away from where the majority of New Zealanders are currently living, which is in urban settlements and cities. You know, and you just have to look at history, and this is a wonderful example from London, where there are nearly 500 streets and places within that city named after food. So there's 17 types of fish, and 43 streets are named after chestnuts, and 32 herbs and spices are listed as place names within the City of London, 30 types of fruit and 6 vegetables. The whole city was set up around food production and the movement of food from the productive hinterland into where the people were living. And we all know the results that have come out in our land reports and the loss of productive land on the edges of our cities are mostly to do with urban extension, this kind of urban extension, which is happening here in the Selwyn district. And I know that Selwyn, as well as many other districts, are grappling with reverse sensitivity and incompatible land uses around the edges of our cities, which is also contributing to this land use change and the movement of food production away from where people are living. So that really got us to the research question that we've looked at over the last couple of years, which is how can landscapes for both food production and people prosper within peri-urban New Zealand? So Selwyn is the fastest growing district in the country, and today is really at the forefront of facing this critical challenge, and you are all the key decision makers around what is happening with this land. We have urban expansion onto prime agricultural land, low density greenfield sprawl. We have farms right here in Rolleston that are being designed out of the peri-urban zone, or this new residential area where you can see here illustrated by that road, which is just waiting to be joined up once the farmer here sells the land. Productive land is being fragmented by residential developments, and we have unproductive land uses by way of rural residential developments on prime agricultural land. And then we have this contemporary preference for a very large house, and a term that I've heard George and Gabi speak about a lot recently is this preference for horizontal density. So houses are not getting smaller, they're not going up, but the land area around those houses is getting smaller. And that is how we're achieving our density at the moment. So I'm sure you're all aware that New Zealand's cities were set up to sit on our prime agricultural land, on our most versatile soils, good access to water, good climate, good topography, all for producing food. So we started looking at this question a number of years ago, and one of our first steps was actually to engage in a workshop with the Mayoral Forum, which some of you attended that day, which was really excellent, which was really just helping us explore what some of the issues were from your perspective and from those of the constituents. We went through and evaluated a range of growth scenarios for a hypothetical town, so that we took the issue of land ownership and other pressures that I know you all face as decision makers away, and were able just to really look at what does the land want to be in this area, and where are the bits that need to be protected, and where are the bits that we can grow the residential areas. We did a thematic analysis on that and identified that the main strengths and opportunities that were identified that day were about protecting productive land and also making sure that residents had high accessibility to services, and the weaknesses and threats were around insufficient infrastructure and services, the cost and feasibility, and the reverse sensitivity issues. And then we got very creative and were able to do some visioning ourselves that day. The research then moved on and it was funded by Our Land and Water, one of the National Science Challenges, and we actually looked at a case study here in Selwyn, Waikirikiri Selwyn, looking at Lincoln, Rolleston and Darfield. And again, you all know what the reality of these settlements are and how they sit on our most productive land. So we surveyed 2,050 residents following continuums from the urban areas out into the periphery of each of those settlements. We had 190 surveys returned and 179 were accepted for analysis. And just very briefly to take you through the results of this initial survey, over 90% of participants felt positively about having food production close to where they lived. They really valued it, and they valued it on lots of levels. But that was one of the key findings out of that survey. We also looked at what was the most preferred type of food production to have near where residents were living, which came out to be market gardens, with dairy being the least preferred option. When participants did identify negative issues associated with production, so again, they overwhelmingly felt very positive, but when they were asked to identify what the negative issues were, they talked about issues on human health, particularly with water quality, which I'm sure is not a surprise, the impact of sprays, the use of chemicals, fertilisers, and they were concerned about impacts on human health, on their health, but also that of the environment. And when asked to identify the positive opportunities associated with food production close to residential land, overwhelmingly they identified that there is an opportunity to access local produce. And just to speak to that for a minute, they often talked about the fact that they could see food being produced and wanted to be able to access it and engage with that producer and to buy food locally, but they weren't able to. The food was produced, they felt like they were putting up with the negative impacts that we identified previously, and then the food disappeared. And so they weren't getting that benefit of which is what they desired. We also looked at the preference for production system, and this came out pretty, I suppose there was a range, so conventional farming, organic farming, regenerative farming, and community gardens were all pretty positive. Not many people engaged with the question around mahinga kai, not knowing what it was entailed. So we also did a survey with growers, producers in the peri-urban zone, and although they didn't feel nearly as positive about operating within the peri-urban zone as the residents felt around potentially, being close to food being produced, they did see real benefits in being close to urban infrastructure such as high-speed internet and that closer connection to potential consumers. We went through and did a thematic analysis, and the 4 main themes that came out of the survey responses were around food and farm accessibility, environmental health and protection, health and wealth, and education and communication. We then asked a question around what ideas the participants had in terms of the future of the peri-urban zone when thinking about food production and housing, and we were very pleasantly surprised at the range and the really interesting ideas that participants had. So what we did is we went through, they replied with written responses, and we went through and spatialised them into these diagrams here around what they would look like as a conceptual spatial idea on the ground. So just to highlight a few of those for you today. So there was this one which had housing, which the housing area had an integration of community gardens. It was then surrounded by orchards, then poultry farms, and then large animal farms. There was this idea which had housing that would be surrounded, that would surround farms, and those farms would be connected by publicly accessible green corridors or right-of-ways. And this one specifically talked to a policy-defined peri-urban food production zone. So there would be policy put in place that would allow food to be produced in that zone close to housing, but that there would be specific policy and rules around what size of farm, for instance, what type of farming would happen there. And then that would be surrounded by the conventional rural zone with a large-scale export-orientated model. So we went through and summarised those into 5 prototypes. Scenario 1 was a low-impact farming belt around housing. The second one was a multifunctional green belt. The third one was a hard urban-rural boundary. The fourth one, were urban and peri-urban farms integrated into housing. And the fifth one was a reverse of that. So that was housing that was designed to sit around farms. So how are we going for time, George? Can you give me a couple of minute warning?
You're right to do that, sir?
Yeah, oh, sorry. So the first one was this low impact farming belt, which included things like it might be organic, it would be small scale production, they might be plant-based farms rather than livestock. The food produced would be primarily for the local market, and housing in this area would be accessible to the farms. The low impact farming belt wouldn't be publicly accessible, but it would host a range of community food outreach points such as markets, gate sales and community supported agriculture. We then went through and workshopped each of these 5 scenarios with a group of participants who were included in the initial survey, who came back and engaged in a workshop situation with us around evaluating each of these scenarios. And they were asked to identify positive and negative outcomes that they saw from each of these proposals. So this low impact farming belt was identified that locally grown it would be locally grown, low impact farming, that there would be a direct link between residents and farmers, but that there was still a risk that housing would encroach into that farmland. The multifunctional greenbelt option, so it acts as a buffer to the conventional farms, which are further out. It includes public open spaces, community gardens, sports fields, allotments, walking tracks, native plantings, stormwater management zones, and playgrounds. And I think the key to this one was that it was proposed to be publicly accessible. So if you think about the London Greenbelt and all of the right-of-ways that integrate with the farms within that space, that is what I think people really engaged with this option. Again, we went through and evaluated it around, someone said that they loved the idea of amenity or horticulture, and we don't do enough of this in urban planning. But that large-scale produce would still need to be accessed from large retail complexes and potentially from some large-scale growers because of the scale of farm that was proposed in that greenbelt. The third one is that hard urban-rural boundary, so urban growth would only occur on the existing urban footprint, and the produce produced within that rural zone would be primarily for the export market. It would be large-scale production, likely monoculture. Again, we went through and evaluated it, so there were clear zones for development. Developers would need to rethink expansionist strategies. Residents could learn more about farming practices and the work to get food to plate because it was visible and large-scale and happening right there. And the hard boundary will just get pushed out under pressure from developers was one of the identified negative assessment aspects. Scenario 4 with the concept of these urban farms. So a little bit radical, I suppose, these last 2 options. But this would see existing public open spaces converted to include farms. So if you think of Cornwall Park in Auckland, any new residential developments would include farms, so a bit of an agri-hood model from North America, if you are familiar with that. Farms would be linked by green corridors and food produced primarily for the community that was located around them, so that there would be a far more connected interaction between housing and food production. The assessment showed that this would be a great opportunity for producer-consumer relationships, negative being that access to farms by trucks and farm machinery might be disruptive to residents. And finally, scenario 5 was these farm-based neighbourhoods. So farming becomes the landscape matrix in this scenario, with the highest density housing corridors being set up around the farms. So the preference, the priority being given to farmland here. Food produced in farms close to the housing would be for the local market, and further away would be for export. So someone identified that the population base is higher to help support and fund this idea in this model, but having high density housing in the midst of a farm and rural landscape can't work, and that there would be infrastructure conflicts was a negative assessment. So finally, we went through a process of ranking the scenarios that were discussed at that workshop, with the multifunctional greenbelt coming out as the most preferred option. So just very quickly to talk about the student engagement and a bit more of the work that we're doing at Lincoln University. So students from across our programs include landscape architecture, planning, environmental management, agriculture, property management and evaluation, and we're all, across all the faculties and all the programs, I know there is engagement with this issue with land use evolution, especially in the peri-urban zone. We also have a number of postgraduate research students, so masters research students and PhD students who are looking at peri-urban land use. We have a few specifically looking at ecosystem service modelling within the peri-urban zone, multifunctional green belts and biophilic design, landscape performance evaluation within the peri-urban zone, and different urban design models. So how we plan for and design the peri-urban areas of today is of critical importance to the long-term resilience of our urban areas, and the outcomes will be felt not only today but for future generations. Ngā mihi, thank you.
Thank you for that. George, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'll just leave it to you to ask Shannon any questions with the time that we have left, or if you want to ask about how this might relate to what we're doing with our area plans and the optioneering, I'm happy to take those questions too.
Yeah, I guess I'll start there then. Like, how does the research... So thank you for the research that's done. It's cool that it's local and it's here and it's based on our people and our land. How do we get from this concept, or any of the five, but with some preferred options, through to actually change in practice and seeing some of these actually being delivered, particularly in the context of government's direction to not allow boundaries and basically to open up all land to housing?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I don't envy you all having to be involved in making these decisions and enacting things on the ground. But one thing that comes up at the university with talking with my students is often just around showcasing good examples and really getting the community involved in those, and invite them in to see actually what something different might look like. And, you know, there is some really good stuff going on in Selwyn and in Christchurch City, you know, that's local that people can visit. And maybe it's about, you know, showing them something different. And there's a question that we always talk about around, you know, often developers say that the preference for housing is these single detached, single story, you know, greenfield housing typologies. And I just, you know, I wonder, is that actually true, or is that all that's on offer for people and they don't know a different way of living? So I think a lot of it comes back down to, and this might be very idealistic, but good design, good urban design. Like, how do you make actually higher density living, you know, more preferred for people? How can you create a really high value urban environment that people are going to choose over having their, you know, that own plot of land that is theirs and theirs only and their private space? How can we design really good urban environments where people take ownership more over public spaces and communal spaces together as a community?
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you. I was really pleased to see there were lots of different examples. Where does the current, well, I guess what our peri-urban probably at the moment is actually our lifestyle blocks. So where did the lifestyle blocks fit in, let's say, category 1? Just to make it easy. The first example that you gave us with the green space.
I suppose we didn't talk about lifestyle blocks specifically. Lifestyle blocks were, owners were engaged with as part of that survey spectrum. Yeah, I think lifestyle blocks probably do need quite a lot more research and engagement with, but from a general perspective, having not done specific research in with lifestyle blocks, you know, they often get a bit of a bad rap in terms of their impact on fragmenting productive land and other things, but there's also a lot of really, really good stuff going on with lifestyle blocks in terms of increasing biodiversity and stewardship of the land in those spaces. But yeah, we would need to do more research specifically.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably what I see playing into this is the fact that we have private property rights and free choice.
Yeah.
It's quite different, obviously, like Russia did. If you go up to the picture of the last example, which you've got high density living in a rural environment, actually Russia did implement that. So they put all their workers in a high density, high block, high story place in the middle of a farm. Yeah, I mean, that works really well in a communist nation, but in a country here where we've got free choice, I can see it's going to be very difficult to even for us to even guide this, because people are buying a property based entirely on what they want to do with it, and we can't direct that.
Yeah.
What the other thing I was going to say is, great to see lots of people saying, yeah, we want to connect with our local growers and grow locally and have organic. But I'm going down to the Lincoln markets, and Lincoln's got a lot of urban, people living there who probably filled out your forms. And there's the organic grower is throwing away 3/4 of what he grows every week because he doesn't have these people who want it actually turning up and buying from him. People are still going to the supermarket. So the monopoly, the whole system we've got, we're not actually bucking the trend. We're not actually doing what we say. So do you see that there is an opportunity for us to be able to start to see a change with what people have said they want here versus what they're actually doing?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you've said. And I think that if you look at the demographic of the survey participants and those who engaged with this research, they were of a certain demographic majority, and people who have probably more time, hence being able to fill in a survey and come along to a workshop and things. And so there probably was a bias in terms of those who have that time and flexibility to make more choice, rather than relying on such a high level of convenience that a lot of other people in the population are. It's a challenge in how you shift that, but the talk at least is that, or the finding out of this research at least was that people are wanting to engage more with their local producers. How we go about doing that, I'm not exactly sure at this stage. Yeah.
So thanks for that. And I was involved in one of your workshops. You can see my photo up there. Great. So following on from what Sam has said, so because we had boundaries around all of our towns, and we're not allowed those anymore, and so we can advocate as much as we want and have on submissions and stuff to government, talking to them and such like. But we're councils who don't have that research knowledge base behind us. I mean, we can say some of what you guys are saying, but do you have a network of people that you're involved with that are actually advocating for government as well on your side? Because this is great stuff, and we do acknowledge, and that's why we had boundaries about keeping the urban area and intensifying within that area, and that's what we wanted to do. But I mean, now we're really limited on what we can do in those regards. So I'm just wondering, another avenue is actually having people that can advocate on research that they've got, assuming that the government of the time will look at things like that. I'm just interested to hear what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, is that working? So we don't have any kind of direct line to speaking with central government at all. But you know, there are mechanisms that we've engaged with in terms of so we made a submission on the spatial planning bill, and we talked specifically to the issue of the peri-urban zone and the critical nature of that zone in providing essential ecosystem services to actually enable settlements and cities to be viable into the future. They provide such a lot of critical services, that land, in terms of stormwater management, atmospheric, cooling, biodiversity, food production, you name it, that it's just vitally important. And you can't have a viable city if you're not engaging with those issues. And one of the things that came out of that process was the Environment Committee asked the New Zealand Urban Design Forum to speak with us. So now we've got a connection going between the New Zealand Urban Design Forum and the research that we're doing around peri-urban development.
And so the Urban Design Forum are actually talking to government agencies and such like as well, because there's also the other option that, I mean, have you talked to our MP as a start, or so is she aware of this research? Yes. So I've talked to Nicola a number of times. In fact, I think she's out with Pablo on the farm this afternoon, I believe, out at Ashley Dean, looking at the integral health farm out there, which is being set up more as a peri-urban model of farming for the Selwyn district, with community engagement and open days, and trying to bring the community that lives around that farm along on this journey of change of how we farm that land in the peri-urban zone. Cool, thank you.
Just want to quickly add to that, because you've had the briefing this morning on the Going for Housing Growth programme and the greenfield growth and what that means for urban limits or lack thereof. Through our early engagement on the area plans, there's been the discussion around rural sensitivity, this peri-urban land, and where it's been seen as a problem in the past, I think Shan's research, peri-urban potential, there's a lot of value in that area. I think at the moment in the district plan, we have the general rural zone, makes up over 98% of the land area of the whole district, but we have to recognise that there's not just one rural, this peri-urban area is distinct, and then it needs to be planned for, and that's the value of spatial planning. So through our early engagement, we're having those conversations of what potential this area could have, and those different scenarios Shannon went through, the 5 today. We're planning to go back to the community with what we heard through these workshops, through engagement, through the crowd mapping tool, and compose different options. And the research that Shannon's been part of is going to be brought into those options along with what we've heard from the communities with our own engagement, to form up these different options, to start talking about, well, what could these peri-urban areas look like and what could they offer us in the future. So I think spatial planning has a role to play as well.
Thank you. I'm just noting time. We've got a number of other submissions before lunch. We're just eating into lunch, which is fine. And I think this is a really interesting conversation, so I want it to continue. We've got Sophie and Deborah and Grant. So no more questions after that. Thank you. Sophie.
Actually, I'll probably just withdraw mine then, because you've answered most of it already. I was going to say, just please submit on whatever the new planning bill and everything else is, and we know you will, because food security and resilience and everything, like, it's all good and well to have a market-based economy, but we actually need to have things that work. So,
thanks for your report. Background, used to be 10k away from Rolleston. I'm now 4k from Rolleston. I'm dairy support. It's still a large enclave of dairying left in the Greater Christchurch Urban Development Strategy. As you mentioned, everyone else has given up. We currently have planning legislation that allows farmers under our district plan to take off a minimum of 1 hectare and covenant the rest of the 19 hectares on their land, which allows a scattering of lifestyle blocks through productive land. As the growth encroaches, so does the pressure and the expectation of reverse sensitivity, because people see themselves as wanting the cows and the sheep, as you said, over the back fence, but when those cows get out and munch up, you've got 150 cows in your backyard, that becomes a real issue. So I looked at some of the information that you actually canvassed, and I just wondered, were they all urban based or was there any rural base? Because under our district plan, 4 hectares, we have a legal, that's a farm. So everything under our district plan, 4 hectares is above. I'm in a 20 hectare area. But it's just looking at the practicalities of what's being presented under our current planning, and it's nice to have something that's really, really forward thinking. But I just wanted to know, were the people that you actually surveyed, were they rurally based or were they predominantly urban based? Because there is a totally different viewpoint now encroaching within the Greater Christchurch Urban Development Strategy location and the expectation of trying to farm.
Yeah, so the majority of participants involved in this project were probably on urban land. We did work in Darfield as well, which and I don't know the percentage of participants, but that is recorded in our study, that were on those bigger land holding parcels. But yeah, I don't have that data with me today around that, but I think it's safe to say predominantly they were more of the residential type of landowner or resident. Yeah.
I'm in a catchment group which is centred around Lincoln and Ralston, and unfortunately the peri-urban that you put up is doomed to fail without having really rock solid, unchangeable zoning rules, because inevitably people are driven by land use change is driven by return per hectare, and so people who are passionate sheep farmers now milk cows. And ultimately, as you get more urbanised, the value of that land goes up and you get rated out. And you see that in Blenheim, where there used to be dairy farmers in Blenheim and now grape farmers, and now they're out. And the only way we could help as a council, in my view, is twofold: is A, having very strong zoning rules around what land is and unchangeable, so that you're unattackable, and secondary, looking at differential rating, which actually encourages food producers to stay on that land and create a return, because the reality is that as the block gets smaller or gets more intensified, the rates get so high you can't get a good enough return from your vegetables and stuff that sounds nice and goes to a farmer's market, that just ain't enough return to pay the bills. And so who's going to run it? So I think the rosy glasses probably need to come off a wee bit and be more focused on really solutions. Yeah.
Thank you. Did you have any final things you'd like to say or share? And George, any closing comments?
No, I just think it's really great that Shannon was able to come and speak to us about her research, and I think it's in the spirit of the MOU to have that come back to us and close the loop on what you've been involved in. And I think it's really great to see how the university and their work and research is influencing and informing what we're doing with our mahi in the area plan space. So it's nice to see that link. And
cool.
Yeah, thanks to Shannon for coming out.
Thanks, George. Thank you, everybody. I was just going to say, in terms of, we have quite a lot of capacity at the university to do research, and, we have a lot of research students coming through and a lot of undergraduate students. And so if there are issues or ideas for research that you have that we can help with, then please reach out, and we can set something up and design something with you and along with a student probably to help carry out some of that research.
Cool, thank you. In the presentation that you've given today, would you be up for sharing that, for example, with all of the city councils in the country? Because we'd love to talk with you about how this information is not just here and for us, but could actually start to inform how, large cities are actually thinking about their growth and expansion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. We'll talk to you afterwards. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the public briefing. So we'll close the live stream.